suggestion would be, if you're starting to make a film or you want to express yourself on some sort of visual narrative, I don't know if you have to be conscious of your style. You know, I mean, you can use a sense of an aspect of some style that you think you might have as a, but be aware that it might reveal itself to be something else, and that's what's more important, and that's the essential of who you are and what you're trying to say and how you're expressing it. You're using the tools to express it, because ultimately, if you take away all the equipment, you still have to be able to tell the story. Can't talk about my own style. I don't know what that is really. So. Other people could do it if they want, but I don't know how to. So I'm trying to make the pictures, feel the need at times to really make these pictures, for whatever that means. Well, to me, it means that you can't. It means that it's hard for you to continue your daily life unless you work on this particular story or work out making a film, so to speak. So I'm just making the pictures, telling the stories, trying to capture the emotions, the ideas, and really trying to provoke, to the best of my ability, what's left of my time and what's left of the capacity for my brain, basically, going further into the mystery of filmmaking. We now agree that verbal literacy is necessary, and we take that for granted. But a couple of thousand years ago, Socrates actually disagreed. His argument was almost the very same, identical to the arguments of people today who object to the internet, or the people back in the 60s and 70s who warned about the evils of television. Socrates worried that writing and reading would actually lead to not truly knowing it. He believed that if people were to stop memorizing and start writing and reading, they'd be in danger of cultivating the appearance of wisdom as opposed to the real thing. He was afraid that reading it would take away the actual knowledge and the understanding of the text. So the same kinds of questions still come up around moving images. They're too literal, they leave nothing to the imagination, and they're inferior to the written word. So now, if you're taking this class, I'm going to take it for granted that you don't agree with those ideas. But if you're going to make films, I promise you that you're going to encounter them, because words and images have a common source. So when you look at ancient writing, you see that words and images are almost indistinguishable. In fact, words are images, they're symbols. Written Chinese and Japanese still actually look like pictographic languages. The written word is not superior to the moving image. They are both ways, they are both modes of communication and expression of equal value. So to me, when people talk about visual literacy, I think that in the end, there's just literacy, period. The most important thing is to understand the difference between certain images, or to be more precise, certain sequences of images. Some are meant to sell something, some are meant to just entertain, and some are meant to, inform. And some, and this is what we're talking about here, are meant to tell stories, and in so doing, pursue and discover something surprising and mysterious. Not all images are there to be, eaten, consumed like fast food and forgotten. That's important to remember. We're not mass manufacturers, we're trying to be filmmakers. The world of movie making, where these remarkable images came from, the stories and the worlds they depicted, this felt very, very distant. I mean, I did have the dreams of maybe putting something together like what would become a movie, but these were purely dreams. There was no way to actually implement this in any way, and no way we really thought that such a thing could happen to us, to be able to make a film. It was like a place that you had to conquer, in a way. You had to overtake and be able to do your own thing. So the next best thing I was able to do, since it was a working class family, didn't have cameras and that sort of thing, was too expensive. So I was able to, the only way I can express this desire, or this impulse, I should say, was to draw imaginary movies in a small room that I was in the tenements living downtown on Elizabeth Street. These were different genres. Some were based on television shows I saw. Some were watercolored. Some were just black and white with ebony pencils. Some were even sepia. A lot of those don't exist. What does exist now is the beginnings of an ancient Roman epic, which I never finished, which allowed me to play with aspect ratios, or what I now know as an aspect ratio, in 65 millimeter or 70 millimeter aspect ratio. And so this was a way of trying to tell the stories from frame to frame. I'd show it to a few friends, but they felt that they were just stills, drawings. And I explained to them that in between the frames that were drawn, there was movement, or you have to imagine the movement, you see. The only way I could try to come up with the visual narrative or make a movie, quote unquote, was to draw these pictures within frames. And sometimes it'd be a strip of paper and maybe divided into 3 frames. And the difference between each frame, sometimes I found myself editing, telling the story with medium shots, close-ups, wide shots, that sort of thing. Very rarely were the frames from frame 1 to 2 or frame 2 to 3 wide shots, simply wide shots, sort of like in the first films that were made. I was just finding my way based upon what I saw in the movie theater and on television. And so in some cases, the frames would be cuts from one to the other. In others, there would be frames which represented 3 or 4 parts of the same shot. I imagined camera movement. And I also imagined that when the cuts were made, that there was some sort of movement in the film, in a way, and one would have to use your imagination. So when I was able to start to actually put a film together, the only thing I could relate to really was to go back to those drawings and design the whole picture on paper, which is what I did in my first short films and pretty much subsequently most of the films I made. On a practical level, it gives you an idea of exactly what you want to get that particular day of shooting or for the entire schedule of the picture, so that you can utilize the time properly. You don't make it up as you go along on set and waste that time and energy of everyone and money. So it was meant as a not just a blueprint, but an actualization of the shots I wanted to get, exactly how they go. I think the documentaries I've been trying to do over the years, or the nonfiction films, are really, for me, projects that have no rules, in a sense. And if they have no rules, it gets tougher, you know? So what that means, they're ripe places for experimenting or finding another way to tell a story, whether it's through a piece of music or whether the editing itself becomes music, meaning rhythm and pace. And telling stories elliptically, I tend to want to continue making these nonfiction films because I'd hoped, or at times feel, that they should inform the narrative structure of the fictional films I make. And there's a freedom in making these documentaries or these music films, so to speak. There's a freedom of form that loosens me up in a way. Everything's included in the shooting of it. If you are shooting certain scenes, sometimes it's the footage that already exists. The shooting of it, and particularly in the editing, there is no such thing as editing. It's writing, editing. You're making the film there in that room, you know. And so you can go many different ways. It's infinite. And so it's really a challenge, as they say. It's also true of the documentary I made about my parents called Italian American. In fact, I learned a lot from that by letting them exist, I should say, within the frame and tell the stories without intercutting or finding obvious cinematic techniques to push time forward or backwards. Didn't matter. Jump cuts, putting 12 frames of black leader slugs in the middle of a story just to get to another point. and just holding on the person. Really, it was a great lesson. In the pictures I've made that are set within the world where I grew up, or related to that world, like Mean Streets or Raging Bull or Goodfellas or so and so, I think, for example, one aspect of it that's really important is the body language. It's very important. The way that people relate to each other physically. I suppose it was that fact which let it take center stage and didn't complicate it with cutting or anything superficially cinematic in the creation of certain kinds of stories. In many cases, it's when to hold the shot, when to let the people speak, when to just watch them, and not move the camera and not cut. You find what's there, and that, in a sense, they inhabit the film. The use of voiceover is very important to me. It was just a natural element in making movies. I appreciated so much over the years seeing films with voiceover, particularly Kind Hearts and Coronets, with that wonderfully restrained humor of the voiceover, the irony, which put me in the mind thereof, so to speak, of using ironic voiceover in Goodfellas. The inherent humor in some of the voiceover in that film is sparked from Kind Hearts and Coronets or other films at the time. Particularly, there was also a wonderful use of voiceover in Shoot the Piano Player, Truffaut, and Jules and Jim. I like that very much. It goes back and forth through time and space, building up the relationship of the two men and their friends in that world, the world of the left bank at that time. And for me, yes, it has a lot of exposition, meaning explaining what you're seeing, but somehow the words don't necessarily, are not needed to fully explain it, what you're seeing. In other words, the narration itself is not expository in a dull sense, in a didactic way. It somehow expresses the joy and the warmth and the love between these characters, and also the freewheeling aspect of this kind of thinking, this life that they're living, or the life they'd like to live too. And so I thought, what about a whole movie that way? And that became Goodfellas. And so that was a spark there. Barry Lyndon's another good example of voiceover. The language of the voiceover in that particular film. The language itself. And so that led to, of course, the use of the voiceover in Age of Innocence. That when we were about to make the film, there were those who were in the production who turned to me and said, "Who's talking?" I didn't realize people took it that literally. Who's talking? The storyteller. I don't know. The person telling you the story, or the person living the story. And so I never took it that literal. In many cases, I believe. So Age of Innocence, we had the opportunity there to play with voiceover from the book by Edith Wharton, using her language. In very much the same way, not the same way, but very much inspired by the use of language in Barry Lyndon and a number of other films in voiceover. The whole point is that when I found narration, the use of narration and voiceover as part of the storytelling, as natural to me, the very first film I made, the very first short film I made, it's covered with voiceover. It's an element of the storytelling in film, not a literary device. In the case of Age of Innocence, we're able to take advantage of the literary because we could take the voiceover directly from what was written in the book and the novel by Edith Wharton. But for me, it was one of the cinematic elements in the film, not a literary element at all, and not for something to just give you exposition as to what's happening in the film.